Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Dr. Kallal Banerjee. Today we can take the lessons on teaching learning process. A thousand teachers, a thousand methods. What is the outline of today's discussion? First, we are going for the short introductions, then definitions, term related to the teaching learning process. Then we can discuss the principle of effective teaching and learning process. Then we go for the principles of learning, aspects of teaching learning process, and information processing. Now, the first question is, what is teaching? Teaching as a process of interacting. The process of engaging students in the different activities that will enable them to acquire knowledge, skill, as well as the values and attitudes. Now, what is the teaching approach? It is basically a set of principles, beliefs, ideas about the nature of learning, which is translated in the classrooms. Now it comes to the principles of the teaching. Basically, these are the principles which we can basically follow in the teaching learning process. What is this? Principle of using knowledge, is the previous knowledge. Principles of providing for individual differences. Principle of readiness. Principle of the meaningfulness. Principle of defining the specific objectives and of the lessons. Principle of proceedings from the simple to the complex. Principles of proceedings from the concrete to abstracts. Principle of proceedings from the general to specific. Principles of proceedings from the known to unknown. These are the general principles which we basically follow in the teaching. In the teaching, learning is an active process. We have actively engaged the learners in the learning activities if we want them to learn what we intended to teach. Basically, the previous research shows 75% of our retention rates in learning by doing different types of the activities, and 90% of the retention rates in the learning by teaching others. So, guiding principles in selections in the teaching strategy, these are the principles which we can basically follow in the learning process. That means, based on the sites, 75% of the 75% depends upon on the sites, 13% based on your hearings, 6% based on your touch, 3% based on your smell, and 3% based on your test process. So, in the teaching process, we have to plan first, then we have to implement those plans, and we have to evaluate the plans. And there is always the feedbacks and reflections in the stages are there. So these entire things is basically a teaching process. Now, in the teaching, there is a three major stages are there. First stage, or stage number 1, pre-active stage. Stage number 2, interactive stage. Stage number 3, post-active stage. Basically, pre-active stage deals with fixing up the goals and the contents. Interactive stage is based on the diagnosis of the learners, actions and reactions. Stage 3 is basically post-active stage, which is appropriate testing devices. That means feedbacks as well as test. This is the teaching phases. In that means whatever we can discuss in this particular slides, that means the plan, implementations and evaluation. These are the three essential parameters in your teaching process. So basically we can discuss now the planning phase. What is the planning phase? Planning phase includes the decision like the need which is needed for the learners, achievable goals and objectives to meet the needs, selections of the contents, motivation to carry out for reaching the goal state, approach that fit to carry out the goals, evaluations process to measure the learning's outcomes. This is the basically the planning phase. What is the major considerations in the planning? One is the learners, availability of the materials, time requirement for the particular activities, and strategy needed to achieve those specific objectives. The strategic part comes later. Then after plans, then we can comes to the implementations. So implementation phase based on the objectives. Implementation means to put into the actions of the different activities in order to achieve the desired objectives and the results. Interactions of the teacher and learner is so much important in accomplishment of the plans which you can take in your planning phase. Use of different teaching styles and strategy to include in this phase. After implementation, now it is your parts to evaluations. Evaluations is one of the important parameters. Evaluations means a match of the objectives with the learning outcomes will be made. Answer of the questions if the plans and implementations has been successfully achieved, and proper feedbacks. So in the teaching learning process, what is our basic assumptions? Teaching is a goal oriented with the changes of the behavior. Teaching is a rational and reflective process. Teachers by their action can influence the learner to change their own thinking parts, own behavior parts. Thus, teaching is a way of changing behavior, thought process, and throughout the changing process, interventions of the teachers is very much essential. So, good teaching is one of the well-planned, well activities are interrelated to each other. One of the provide learning experience or the situation that will ensure understanding, applications and your critical thinking process. So learning is a process of learning. To teach is to make someone to learn. Now the question is, what is the learning? Learning defined as the change in an individual behavior caused by experience or self-activity. It implies that learning can only happen through the individual activities or his own and can be implemented through teaching learning process. So in the learning process, 8 internal events you are always remember. One is motivation phase, apprehending phase, acquisition phase, retention phase, recall phase, generalizations phase and feedback phase. So if I cannot learn the way you teach, you will teach me the way I can learn. Now we comes to the methods in the learning or in the teaching. Interactive lectures followed by some breaks is very much required in the good teaching process. So first you can take the lectures or you can provide the lectures, put some breaks, then again put some lectures, again breaks, then you can put some tasks to the students to solve this, then you can again breaks, then you can evaluate the tasks. This is basically the methods which you can follow. Now the question is, how do we learn? How do we learn? Basically, learn is basically to acquire the knowledge. Knowledge is the informations multiplied with the reflections and the processing. In the knowledge acquiring phase, is very much important to retain the students in the classrooms. So average student retention rates is based on the learning pyramids. What is the learning pyramids? 5% of your lectures, 5% of the retentions will depend upon based on your lecture. 10% of the student retention based on your readings. 20% of the retention based on your audio-visual presentations. 30% of the retention is based on your demonstrations. 50% based on your discussions. 75% based on your practice doing, and 90% based on your teach others and intermediate use. So in the learning pyramids, 50% of the retention is basically depends upon the discussions. So these are the basic things which we can discuss in the teaching learning process. Now we are going to highlight the strategies. So these strategies, so before going to highlight the teaching strategies, what are the basic objectives we have to follow? It is important for all of us to understand. Number one, identify strategies to improve effective teaching. Number one. Number two, implement the strategies to improve overall students' results. And third one, increase collaborative strategy with the parents and all team members. In the strategy implementations, we are basically dealing with the SMART model. So what is the SMART? S for systematically, M for meaningful to the students and all other stakeholders, A for arranged collaboratively, R for result oriented, result focus, and T for teaching effectively. So in the strategy implementation phase, this is our agenda. First, we have to discuss the plans or instructions, then manage instructions, then deliver instructions, then evaluate instructions. So in our discussions, we can first discuss the plan of instructions, then we can deliver the instructions, then we can discuss evaluate and manage. This is our roadmap of the discussion. In the plan of instructions, we are basically follow some of the strategy. In the delivery of instructions, we can follow some of the strategy. In the evaluate of the instructions, we can follow some of the strategy. And manage the instructions, we can simultaneously follow some of the strategy. Now we come to the first one, the plan instruction. What are the basic strategy we can follow in this plan instruction phase? The strategy basically we can follow in the first, in the strategy number 1, basically the effective practice, effective instructions, effective coaching. This is this is the strategy number 1 for planning phase. Now come to the strategy number 2. This is a lot of strategy. Increase the frequency. This is the strategy number 2 in the planning phase. Third phase, third strategy. Now we can going for the third strategy. Increase the variety of presentations, different presentations methods, variety of material, variety of formats. Then we come to the next strategy, use of quick tasks. You can give the task to the students and evaluate the task. Next strategy is create the student centric atmosphere by which student can access all the materials easily and effectively. Then consider the proximity. Then strategy is the thinking level of instructions. Level of instructions is very much important in the strategic phase. Independent, instructional. Among 3 reading levels, independent reading level is one of the most important parameters. Independent practice. Then comes for procedure, use of procedures, routine. That means you can prepare your plan based on the proper procedures and based on the routines. Then comes to provides a model for the entire plans. Then then the next strategy, use the incentives to the student so that they can actively engage in your teaching learning process. Then comes to the next strategy, use explicitly different types of the questions. Use different types of the question or ask the students to clear his doubts. Create turn thinking opportunities. These are the strategies. Focus on what you fits under your fingertips. These are the basically strategies we can use in your planning phase. After and one of the important strategies in your planning phase, provide intensive training supports to the learners. So these are the strategies which you can follow in the plans instructions phase. Now we comes to evaluations. So evaluations of the strategy is one of the important parameters. Evaluations basically deals with the accuracy through specific some models. Here we can highlight one of the models, which is the qualitative analysis in case of the evaluations, and we have to give the suitable score for each and every phases of the student, every level of the students. It is one of the important models. Or you can follow the another evaluation phase, that is first final set your goals or standards, then follow the targeted instructions, then informed teachings. After that you comes to the data analysis, respondings of the data and whether it can reach your goals or not. You can evaluate that part also. Now, another evaluations phase is collect the data systematically. You can collect the data, that means students' response from the student sides, collect systematically and evaluate them. That means analyze that data. After analysis phase is over, then that means evaluations part is over, then we can comes to the deliver of the instructions. For that, we can follow some strategy. We always try to implement or try to use integrated instructions phase or integrated instructions process. It can be the combinations of reading, writing, speaking and listening. All the combinations, that is the integrated model, integrated instructions models. We can also follow the rubrics, use of the rubrics, and this is the models. You may follow this one, and you may follow the curriculum as a foundations, the strategy, that is the student learning based on the curriculums, based on the instructions, based on the assessments. You can follow that part also. The plans, taking appropriate plans, whether that particular plan reach your targets or goal state, you can evaluate that part also. That is also important parameters. After that, we can manage the instructions. Now, in the managed instructions, we can highlight some of the appropriate strategies. That means consider all environments, all subjects in formulating your strategy. That means you have to consider internal environments, simultaneously you have to consider the external environments also. That means the all environments in relating to the all the subjects. That is the most important for manage your instructions. You can use different types of the schedules by which you can instruct the students, you can motivate the students, you can inspire the students. So scheduling, proper scheduling is one of the important. And you always change your scheduling parts with respect to the times. That is one of the important things. And in the implementations, peer support from the multi-age groups is very much essential for implementing good teaching learning process. So in the entire teaching learning process, whatever the strategies we can discuss based on the 4 parameters, the parameter number 1, the plan instructions, then we comes the strategy relating to evaluate the instructions, then strategy relating to deliver the instructions, then strategy related to managing the instructions. So these are the strategies. Any teachers, out of these strategies, choose 1 or 2 which he or she think the effective in his or her environment, and definitely it can provide the good results, a win-win situation for the students or for the learners as well as for the teaching community also. So with this, we can end up the today's session. Bye everyone.